Hi, everyone. This is the recording for Friday, April the 9th. I am going to start sharing my screen so that I can continue with this conversation. On Wednesday, for those of you that were there or have seen the video, we start talking about inequality, the second part of this section. We already covered poverty, and then we are about to engage into this idea of distribution, income and wealth distribution. We already talked about that Latin America has the record of being the place on earth registering the highest level of income and wealth distribution, worse than Africa, although Africa is the poorest region in the world. And we also start talking about the Gini coefficient. Actually, I already explained what the Gini coefficient is, so I am not going to explain this again. But essentially, the Gini is a tool that measures income inequality. This is the most general use of the Gini coefficient, income inequality, but you can use it for wealth inequality, land inequality, and other types of indicators. The range is from 0 to 1, where 1 is perfectly unequal and 0 is perfectly equal. Extremes that we have never seen. Normally, the Gini coefficient moves between these two extremes, 0 and 1. I already mentioned that the Gini coefficient has been the typical tool to measure inequality, and that's how we know that Latin America registered or has registered the highest levels for many decades, certainly higher than in the US and in many other countries. I was going to make a very quick comment that in 2007, a Mexican businessman by the name of Carlos Slim, at the time with $49 billion in wealth, was listed by the Forbes magazine as the third richest man on earth. I don't know where Slim is right now, but certainly I'm sure he's in the top 5, top 7, maybe the top 10. But the point is that, when you think about Mexico, you don't think an amazing amount of wealth like in Europe or Canada or the US. Yet there is a few families, including the Slim Elu family, that is at the very top of the income distribution, not just in Mexico, but in the world, which is a very interesting observation, considering that, like I said in the lecture on Wednesday, some people don't even have an identity in remote locations in Mexico. The government doesn't even know they exist because there is no record of this person being born. So, I mean, the disparities are enormous, right? Are really big. Here, I just want to make a quick mention of a very famous Russian-American economist that in 1971 won the Nobel Prize, Simon Kuznets. And the reason this is relevant right now is because among the several reasons he was awarded this prestigious award, this prestigious prize, the Nobel Prize, he produced this hypothesis and in a very famous paper provided some evidence using data for the US and the UK only, no developing country, where he demonstrated this U-shaped behavior on inequality, or equality rather, because what he said was that as the economy expands and grows at early stages of growth and expansion, equality seems to go down, meaning inequality goes up. But it's going to reach a bottom, it's going to reach a plateau when the consolidation of the growth and expansion takes place. And then as the economy keeps expanding over time, the equality should rise. So this is this U shape. The point is that the point that Costin was making was that you don't worry about it. You know, it is normal, you know, according to his argument, that inequality should be high at early levels of economic growth and economic development. But eventually, once it reaches a maximum level of inequality, it should start going down. Obviously, this kind of gives hope to some people, and some analysts took this to heart, and, you know, he won the Nobel Prize. But now we know that, well, the evidence is mixed. While he was able to provide some backup evidence to his claim using a very specific period of time for only two countries, the US and the UK, once you apply the same or similar principles to try to find the same evidence in places like Latin America, well, the constant hypothesis just doesn't hold water. I have not seen any convincing article, scientific study that demonstrates that there is evidence that this is true. And, you know, it's common sense. I mean, if you look at the evidence, Latin America has been expanding for a while, not just, well, during the Washington consensus, but even after. So, you know, we're talking about not 2, 3, 4, 10 years. We're talking about decades, you know, the 90s, the 2000s, the 2010s, and we're about to get into the 2020s. So we're talking about 30, 40 years already, and inequality is not going down, right? So according to the Kuznets hypothesis, inequality should be going down probably, you know, 10, 15 years ago, and that has not happened. But anyway, I wanted to mention this because it's a very famous hypothesis, and Simon Kuznets is a Russian economist that is of a, you know, with the very high rank economists in the world. Unfortunately, at least for the case of Latin America, this hypothesis just, there is no empirical evidence of that. Anyway, this table just shows the state of income distribution using a very slightly different approach. Remember, on Wednesday, I mentioned that an alternative way to measure inequality to Gini is the percentage share of income, or the percentage share of consumption. In this case, I believe this is the percentage share of income going to the lowest 20% of the population or the highest 20% of the population. So, for example, countries with high inequality, at least in these years, in the second column, Brazil, Chile. So think about this: the top 20% of the population receives 63% of income, or the top 10% of the population receive 46.7%. You know, this is, if you remember, and just to make sure that you understand what this chart is telling you, you probably know the very famous movement, the 99%, right? Okay, you guys in the top 1% accumulate X amount of income and wealth in this country. What about the 99%? Well, it's the same idea, but rather than dividing the population in deciles or quintiles, they divide the population in 100 segments, you know, leaving the top 1% and the 99% on the other side of the distribution. Anyway, that's all that all this chart is telling you, and I don't want to spend more time there. I already explained this chart in the previous class. So let's try to sketch an answer as to what explains this high and persistent income and wealth inequality in Latin America. I don't know the complete answer to this, but I think we can point to several significant factors in trying to sketch this answer. So number one, the colonial legacy. If you remember, the distribution of land was highly unequal. Spanish people born in Spain or descendants of those people are the ones that accumulated the largest majority of land, or at least the most productive land. So generations after generations, these families have passed on this to their descendants. And although there have been some redistribution efforts and things have been sold and exchanged, the point is that the best land and there is still a large concentration of land. But not only that is the part of the colonial legacy explanation. Remember, the colonialism also brought really weak or bad institutions with weak redistributed policies and very low capital investment. So all these institutional arrangements that came during colonization didn't help, and are still influencing decision-making, policy-making in the region that is not necessarily conducive to promoting a better distribution of income. And this is the second point, the policy-making. 200 years since independence, we're talking about 1820s plus 200 years, that's 2020s. For 200 years, typically the dominant groups have launched and implemented policies where the most benefits go to those in power, and they have no interest in sharing this. They are the main beneficiaries of these high returns to capital, to investment, and so forth. The third reason, I already explained this in my previous previous class, is the significant underdevelopment of human capital. And when I say human capital, again, I am not talking only about education. I also want to include health. They complement each other. Healthier people typically have a higher level of education, and highly educated people also tend to be healthier. They understand the importance of exercising, eating well, sleeping habits. And when you're healthy, you are, more likely to not to miss school, to enjoy a good book. You're going to have access to glasses, to dental work that are going to facilitate a lot of the learning experience and so forth. So they complement each other. Unfortunately, in Latin America, human capital has not been at the forefront of any strategy. They talk about industrialization. They talk about, export promotion. They talk about all of these neoliberal arguments are really good in terms of economic growth. But when it comes to economic development, you typically don't hear, politicians or policymakers saying, all right, let's really make a serious effort to increase the level of human capital. It's all about physical capital, machines, infrastructure, buildings, factories, which is good. I'm not saying that's not the way to go. I'm just saying it's an incomplete vision of economic development. If we want to invest, it should be in physical capital, yes, but also human capital. And number 4, unfortunately, I already mentioned this, that technology has a bias against unskilled people. There is a larger level of complementarity between technology and high-skilled labor than technology and unskilled labor. In fact, most of the new technology that we are developing in the world is labor-saving technology, which basically means that you can displace or misplace a large number of unskilled people and replace them with some sort of machine. And this is going to increase. We know that this is going to increase, it's going to accelerate in the next few years. When you think about robotization, automation, many of the professions that we now know are probably going to disappear. And unfortunately, many of these professions that are going to disappear are held by unskilled people. Anyway, so how has Latin America reacted? Well, again, this is part of the whole issue related to the new left. in different countries, many people organized and reacted or has reacted different to these increased disparities, this social tension, this wealth inequality. And you can see some of the rural and urban movements that have been taking place over time in different places in Latin America, in Brazil, Bolivia, in Mexico in 1994, in Ecuador, Colombia. All of these countries have a different group or different groups behind the movements in reaction, opposition to policies and results of those policies. And this may help a little bit to also refine your searches. You were asking me these questions on Wednesday about, placing the New Left chronologically speaking. And I said, well, the New Left that we have been talking about is mostly in the late 1990s, early 2000s. So this section is probably going to clarify some of these ideas. James Petras, a very famous person in political science here in the US, defined the left as three waves, not the new left, just the left in Latin America. So the first wave took place in the 1960s, the 1970s, and this is the time of Fidel Castro in Cuba. Even you can think of Chile in the case of when the dictatorship took place with Pinochet. That is part of this first wave, the 1960s, the 1970s. The second wave has to do with other countries, Nicaragua, Venezuela, the PRD in Mexico, the early manifestations of the New Left that didn't go far because they never won the presidency in Mexico. But anyway, the New Left is the one that has been taking place in the last 25 years. So that kind of matches, what we have been talking about. And the point is that this New Left is a little bit different because it's not anchored at university, so there is no great thinkers behind or professors behind of anything like that. And also, it doesn't have very much financial resources. This is a true grassroots movement that normally have been generated or emerged in rural areas. And this is why, let me go back to this, here you have the landless rural workers, coca growing farmers in Bolivia. That's where, Evo Morales came from. The National Peasant Federation, Marcos in southern Mexico, also rural areas. Most of these people are not coming from the cities, universities, think tanks. They are coming from rural areas where poverty and inequality just reach extreme levels. So they reacted really, really widely. And remember, because of the democratization process that Latin America has been going through, many of these people now are finding the political spaces, the political tools to grab power in the political structure of the country. Some of them are forming political parties. Some of them are just forming alliances with political parties. But the point is that in many of these cases, they don't need weapons anymore. Now they have access to, better communication systems, radio, TV, now the internet, social networks, and also they have, the means to, exercise voting rights that many years ago only dreamed about. So now, because of the democratization process, you have electoral colleges and electoral offices, not just in the cities, but also in rural areas where they are capturing the votes and the sentiment and the political pulse of not just the main cities in Latin America, but is starting to penetrate the rural areas. And that's kind of important in terms of economic development, because you are capturing a wider audience, a wider voice, and they are expressing what they need and what they want with their vote. By the way, this, I don't want to raise any political issues here, but I don't know many other Latin American countries, but Mexico is one of those countries that requires a voting ID before you can actually go to vote. With no ID, you just cannot vote. Anyway, I just want to mention that and just leave it there. Okay. Now, the new left in Latin America is not an isolated event, is not an isolated movement. Places like Africa, like South Asia, and other poor regions in the world, former Soviet republics and others, have been in communication with each other. And for years, they have organized what they call the World Social Forum. Now, many of you probably are familiar with the World Economic Forum, this one that I am highlighting, that typically takes place in Switzerland. And, the bankers of the world go there, the entrepreneurs of the world go there, Bill Gates goes there, the president of the Federal Reserve goes there. And it's a meeting where basically the money shakers, the people with access to all the resources around the world, government and private entities, get together to figure out what's going on in the world economy, what to do about it, how to do it, and all that, right? Well, the World Social Forum is typically taking place at the same time that the World Economic Forum, but it takes place in a developing country. I think the first one was in Brazil, and they for some reason go back to Rio de Janeiro frequently, but it goes to different places. Actually, there is a website here with a BR for Brazil. You see that right here? Anyway, the idea of this World Social Forum is to counterbalance the rhetoric and the ideas of the World Economic Forum. So the World Social Forum is, you can see here, I wrote left-wing members of the left, not just of Latin America, but from Africa, from Eastern Europe and South Asia and other places. And they basically start criticizing neoliberal policies that come out of the World Economic Forum in Switzerland. Anyway, and you can read some of these criticisms on the screen. But let me skip this to this section. You have to take all these ideas with a grain of salt, because unfortunately, although I think it's a noble goal to have some counterbalance, the World Social Forum counterbalancing the World Economic Forum, the World Social Forum has not been able to articulate a very practical response to the policies, pronouncements, and rhetoric coming out of the World Economic Forum. So they basically criticize the World Social Forum. They criticize neoliberal policies. They go after all these policies. They criticize globalization. They say all these things, but they don't have a concrete counter proposal. They have not been able to articulate, okay, what is the alternative? Okay, you're saying that neoliberal policies don't work. Okay, what could work? They have not been able to articulate that key element yet. They talk about a new social policy, all of these things that are pro-poor, pro-environment, and all of these things. But unfortunately, as I said, they are not or have not yet been able to propose a viable, practical, reasonable, defensible alternative. And we can talk more about this in our next class, but let me continue with this last section. All right, so hopefully by now you have a better idea of poverty in Latin America, inequality in Latin America, what are the main groups talking about it, the new left, the indicators behind these things. And in most discussions about poverty and inequality, the issue of remittances comes up. All right, so let's define remittances. Remittances, in essence, are resources, money, that nationals of a given country working in another country are sending back to their relatives and families in their home country. What? Okay, so the typical example of this is right here in California, right? So you have a lot of people from Mexico, Central America, working here in the fields, some of which are undocumented, and they are working really hard, but they don't spend all the money. Most of the money they send back to their relatives in Mexico, Honduras, Guatemala, and many other countries. Those resources that are moving back from the US to Mexico, Central America, etc., are called remittances, right? Now, for the US, this represents a leakage, a bleeding of resources, which can be pretty big. You know, we're talking about I think, don't quote me on this right now, I don't have the exact number, but I think the record just to Mexico is more than $20 billion a year. $20 billion per year, just to Mexico, right? From the US. But anyway, for the recipient, in this case, Mexico, this implies an influx of resources, an injection of $20 billion fresh to the income stream of the Mexican economy, right? So for some of these countries, remittances represents a relatively small proportion, you know, relative to the size of the economy. But for some other countries, remittances can represent a very large proportion of their economy. Anyway, here on figure 2, you have, you know, growth of remittances all the way to 2003, $40 billion or so in 2004. I don't know what the number is right now, but it's probably approaching $90 billion, you know, more than double in the last 15 years or so. And of course, this is what matters to us. Okay, why is this related to poverty and inequality? Well, there are many angles. And again, we can talk about this later in class when all of us are present, but this is very important, guys. There is a large empirical evidence, a large number of studies with empirical evidence showing that although remittances do not have any impact on income or wealth inequality, they do appear to have an impact on reducing poverty. Yes. So in red, let me highlight this. According to some credible studies, or at least what they seem to be credible because they have sound methodology, and you know they are publishing papers with good reputation. For each percentage point increase in the share of remittances to GDP, the fraction of the population that escapes poverty in Latin America is about 0.4%. All right, it's not much. It's not much, but there is empirical evidence that says the more remittances you send to your country, the lower the number of poor people you are going to find. So this can help to understand, well, several things. One, why so many people migrate north from Central America, Mexico to the US. Because they understand that sending money back to the relatives, families, can actually help to alleviate whatever they are going through, right? Number two, this also explains, at least partially explains, why, sometimes governments, perhaps like Mexico, are not hugely interested in avoiding Mexicans leaving, or the government of Honduras, their connationals leaving, because when they leave, well, two things happen. They don't have to employ them. They don't have to, pay for, Social Security. They just left the country. But not only that, number two, they're going to be sending money back, right? So obviously politicians and the rhetoric goes like, oh, we don't want our nationals to leave. We want to keep them here. We are doing everything possible and all of these things. But when you think about economics, purely economic terms, it's not such a bad deal that, you have 2-3 million people leaving your country. You don't have to employ them. And yet you're going to be receiving billions of dollars every year without basically doing nothing. Obviously, when all of these billions of dollars enter the income stream of Mexico or Honduras, they start circulating. So they generate income tax, sales tax, property tax. They are injecting really life into the economy of these recipient countries. So this is actually welcome in a way by the governments of these countries that in many cases are unable to spend $40 billion on their own to stimulate the economy. Well, remittances can do that job. So think about that because it's important to understand the incentives, the politics, the rhetoric behind immigration and behind remittances. It's not black and white, guys. It's highly complex. It's very complicated, and again, we can talk about that later. Now, here is something very interesting that has been happening in Mexico. Studies were conducted, and it was discovered that the vast majority of the dollars received as remittances by Mexicans were not being invested. They were consumed. And of course, that's how poverty is reduced, right? So you receive, I don't know, $500 a week in this poor town in Mexico. Most of those $500, when you are poor, are going to be used for consumption. You buy food, you buy clothes, you buy things to satisfy your immediate needs, medicines, glasses, all of these things. You don't invest these things. So what some governments, state and federal governments are doing, federal government is doing in Mexico, is that they are establishing very interesting programs, like, for example, this one, the 2 por 1 or 2 for 1. So in the state of Zacatecas, which is one of the northern states in Mexico, well, central north state in Mexico, what the Mexican government told the population was this: okay, guys, I am going to open this account, and for every dollar that you put into this account coming from remittances, the state government is going to match with another dollar. So if you put $10, the government is going to put another 10. So you're going to have 20. If you put $1 billion, the government is going to put another $1 billion, and now you have $2 billion. But there is a catch. First of all, you are not going to be able to consume these remittances in, food or shelter or clothes. No, the catch is that we are going to use this money to build infrastructure. So you are going to be able to build electricity, sewage, the piping system, a basketball court, a school, things that have to do with infrastructure. And interestingly enough, it has been somewhat successful. Actually, there is another one called 3 por 1, 3 for 1, where now it's not just the state government matching, but the federal government matching. So if they put $1, there is $1 more from the state and $1 more for the government, from the federal government. So if they put $1 billion, now they're going to have $3 billion. And this has been in other states like Guerrero, Jalisco, and other states in Mexico. Now, when you think about this, it's interesting once again, because, well, many reasons, but in particular, one that I would like to highlight is the fact that people are paying taxes already, sales tax, income tax, other taxes. So it is the responsibility of the state government and federal government to provide for this infrastructure in the first place. So they shouldn't be asking the population to contribute more with their remittances in addition to the taxes they are paying, right? So this is something that I would like you to think about, because although it seems like a very clever way to pool resources and make things happen, in many ways, some analysts have argued that this is a very interesting and clever way to deflect your responsibility as government, because, well, basically you are asking the population to pay an extra tax, if you will, when in fact, technically speaking, the government should be building the schools, building the roads, building the sewage using taxpayers' money, and they are not. Here's another program. It's called Invest in Mexico. It's similar, but this is probably a bit more interesting, because now the idea is that the government is going to match resources not for building infrastructure, but to invest in business, new business, expanding business, and so forth. So the point of all these arguments is that the Mexican government and some other governments in Latin America are trying to mimic and to copy programs like this, but they have not been very successful yet. The whole point of all these ideas is that they want to maximize the benefit of remittances. Right now, when people spend remittances in food and shelter and clothes, is good because they enter the income stream and there is this multiplier effect, and that's good. But they understand, the Mexican government understands that there are other ways to spend the money whereby the benefits could be even higher, like getting money into infrastructure, kind of free riding on people by overtaxing them. Or number two, by helping the population to create business, for example, here you can see the opportunity to invest in their communities to generate employment and foster economic activity through starting business such as drugstores, supermarkets, gas stations, restaurants. So the idea is that many times or oftentimes you have people in these communities with the entrepreneurial ability with a good business plan and all of these things. They just don't have the startup money. They or like we already discussed, they don't have the ability to go to the bank and borrow the money because of these barriers. You know, they don't have collateral, they don't have all this paperwork, and the banks are reluctant to make loans on those conditions. So they are looking for alternative ways to finance their business operations. So this could be another one: remittances from connationals working elsewhere. Now, you know, just to conclude with this, the competition, business competing to gain the ability to send your money back to your country is fierce. It's fierce. You have many competition. You have, you know, one of the first companies to do that was Western Union. Some of you probably remember this, but now you have all sorts of companies. Because think about this: if you think about, say, $50 billion a year, and you charge a commission of 1%, I don't even know how to do the calculation right now. I don't have my calculator on me, but think about this. Think about the size of this market. 1% of 50 or $100 billion is a huge industry, and the competition is fierce. So, you know, this is good for consumers, because when you have more competition, the fee tends to go lower and lower and lower and lower, rather than, you know, 15, 20 years ago, when you had only 2 or 3 companies doing that, the fees were like outrageous, 3, 4, 5%. I remember I actually send money back sometimes to help my family, because, well, they need me to do that. But the point is that obviously I am not undocumented or anything. So, but this adds up to the to the amount of money and the amount of business, right? Anyway, I think this is a good time to stop. I welcome your questions over email, in class, and this is the end of this section on income distribution and inequality. So I am going to stop right now. I know it's probably a bit shorter than usual, but that's okay. It's Friday, and I'm sure you have other fun things to do. So I'm going to stop right now. I will see you on Monday, guys, in a live class.